What's going on, everybody? How you doing? I'm of course D-Dub. Hope you guys are having a good day. Welcome to the channel. If you guys are new, don't forget to subscribe. I do a bunch of videos like this, ranging from video game trailers to different topics and some reviews and overlooks at things and a whole sorts of other things. Just my general thoughts and opinions on gaming as a whole, because I'm a gamer going all the way back to the NES, being a kid of the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s and the 2010s, and we're almost at 2020, baby. So this has just been a crazy ride. We're so many generations into video games and video game systems as a whole. So I thought today we would take a look at all the video game systems and pretty much rank all of the mainline systems, rank them in the order of worst to best. Let's do it. So we don't have too many systems here, but we have most of the mainline ones throughout most of the years. So we're just going to go ahead and start ranking them. We're going to start off here with the DS, which I do have experience with. I pretty much got the Nintendo DS when it first came out. You know, I pretty much got the DS like right after it came out, probably about a year later. And I got things like New Super Mario Brothers and a couple other different games. And then it pretty much just kind of sat around. I kind of was over it and not really paying too much attention to Nintendo at that time. And I ended up just selling it, and then years later I finally ended up getting another Nintendo DS. But overall it's a great system with a massive library, and even though it's starting to die off now and it's not in the public mind so much, it's going to be looked at in reverence down the road, and people are going to remember just how great it was and just what kind of games that it had, and it's going to be sought after like in about 10 years or so, or even less than that. After not seeing it for long enough, there's going to be a resurgence, and with the dual screen aspect of it, it's going to be a little bit hard for people to emulate it cleanly. You can get games like that on the Wii U Virtual Console, and it's just not the same. It's not the same as having two screens in one unit. Everything that I've seen from the emulation, there's just no way to 100% replicate that experience without having the system in front of you. So yes, it's a great system with a great library, and that's pretty much all I have to say about that. This right here, I guess, is the PS Vita, right? Again, I have no experience. I've never played a PS Vita. I did play a bit of a PSP. I'm gonna call it a mid-tier system. Same with the Vita, BNC, the Vita and the PSP. I don't really have much experience with either of those, but it's kind of a shame the way that Sony just sort of put them out into the world and started to gain some traction with it, and then they just kind of said no, and they just sort of left them to rot. And so the things are loved and revered in the modding community. There's plenty of people that have taken those things, done all sorts of homebrew, hacking, and all these different things, and made them much better systems than the way they were originally put out. So even though something like with the DS, where it's a little less desirable or a little bit more kiddish, I guess, as some people would say, usually Sony has the more adult type oriented content on their systems. They just didn't deliver with these systems. They kind of put them out and then they just sort of forgot about them, and it really is a shame because those things could have been much bigger, much better. And by now, the end of 2019, I was hoping that Sony would get back into the game with handheld devices, and with the PS5 going to be coming around next year, not so sure that that's actually going to happen. So a little bit of a shame there. Same for the Nintendo 3DS, the 2DS, those all are going in the same system. I'm going to call the Game Boy Advance an S tier, even though I don't personally have a vast experience with the thing. There really was a long period where even though I knew what Nintendo was doing, I just wasn't paying attention to it. I wasn't going out there and buying the consoles. I wasn't yard sailing or trying to find them on the cheap. Like, one of my friends had a Game Boy Advance and he had quite a few games for it, and I played it from time to time, and I was like, man, this thing's cool. If someone sort of gave me one, or gave me one for my birthday, or I got it on Christmas or whatever, then at that point it would have really like opened my eyes up to it, and I would have saw after it. But it was just one of those things where at the time I just wasn't really paying attention, and I do sort of regret that. I am hoping to boost up my library at some point, which is going to have to start with buying this system, and I suppose we'll go ahead and put the Game Boy in the A tier. I mean, it could just as easily deserve an S or A. I got that system back right after it came out. I was only 2 years old. Yes, that's right, folks. I was 2 years old and had an original giant brick Game Boy that worked for my entire life. The thing did eventually break, and I was just stupid and maybe 12 years old at the time, and I was like, well, this doesn't work anymore, and I threw it away just because the screen didn't work. The stupid shit that we did as kids. That was probably one of the dumber things that I did as a kid, yeah. But then I had a Game Boy Pocket, you know, end of 98, 99. You had Pokemon Red come out, and that basically changed everything. And I do still have a small Game Boy library. Even though I did own a Game Boy, I didn't have a super vast collection. But back in those days, we didn't have internet. You had very small sections of stores like Kmart, or we didn't even have Walmart around at that time. And there just wasn't very many games available for it. And occasionally you would trade games with friends and stuff like that, but it's still a great system. I love the Pocket, and of course, you can't go wrong with the Game Boy Light, and that is basically what everybody strives for. Game Gear, I'm just going to give that a fat old C. It had some good games on it. I didn't own one. I remember my friend getting one of those back in the day, like right after it had come out, and I was sort of like, man, that's cool, but it really seemed like the screen was just embedded in like fog, and that the screen was so far away, and it had the ghosting, and it wasn't really that clear, and the sound was alright, but with the amount of batteries it took, it just seemed like this giant clunky thing where you were trying to get like Sonic and games like that, where they were just better off on the system itself and having them handheld at that point. At that point, I'd already had a Game Boy, and I had already seen things like, you know, Super Mario and the 6 Golden Coins, or the Super Mario Land that originally came out for the Game Boy, and those were different versions to the counterpart that were actually on the NES. They weren't trying to be the same type of thing and replicate the same type of game. So to me, the Game Gear just seemed like a clunky kind of mess that was just less than desirable, and with the amount of batteries that it took, it just wasn't my thing. And even the one that my friend had, he like lost the back of the battery compartment, and I don't recall him playing that much of it, and we were tight at that time, so it just didn't seem like the greatest of all handhelds. So that one gets a C. I'll give the Wii a B. I don't even own a Wii. I do own a Wii U, and at the time one of my friends had a Wii, and he had a bunch of great games on the Virtual Console, but that was again at the time where I was playing the Xbox 360, man, and the Wii just kind of came and went, and I kind of wish I had paid a little bit more attention during that time and got to experience some more of the games at the time, because even though I've gone back and I do have a Wii U and I have purchased Wii games, there's a lot of them that are out there that, with the amount of limited time and with the amount of games that come out now, it's just very unlikely that I'll go back, be able to pick through the games. It's much easier to just stay current with your gaming with so many games come out, and actually paying attention to what is coming out and cherry picking through there, and then looking back in hindsight and saying, man, this was a gem, this game was great. To anybody who wasn't paying attention, these are the games to get, these are the RPGs to look out for. It's much harder to go in retrospect and try to stay up with current gaming now and go back to something like the Wii and start buying games for it, and then actually find the time and the commitment to really give them their time. Most people that would look back on a system would say, like, yeah, I gave the bulk of my time to those games, and this is why I know these things and what the gems are, because when the system was out, that's when it was relevant, and that's when we were all paying attention. So it's much harder to go back in time to a system that you didn't really care for or pay much attention to when it had first come out, and basically go back and try to figure out what the games were and actually give them their due time and the respect, I guess, for lack of a better word, that they actually deserve. So that's kind of my stance on the Wii. Sold crazy, and it definitely changed gaming, so I respect the Wii. So now we're on the Sega Saturn. I guess same, I'm gonna give it a C. It's a system I've never played. I've never touched the thing. I remember seeing demo units and stuff back in the day. I don't even recall playing them. But the problem was, of course, Sega kept doing this thing over and over where it was like they put out the 32X, then they kind of abandoned it, even though people were interested, but people were also kind of taken back, like waiting for the next thing. Then the Saturn came out. The 32X died. The people that bought that were screwed over. The people that bought the Sega Saturn, same thing kind of happened to them. It was like a couple years went by, and then now the Dreamcast is coming out. So I know there's gems for the Sega Saturn, but that is just a system that, unless I win the lottery or find like a box full of Sega Saturn stuff, I don't think I'm ever going to come across one. Or even if I were to go on eBay and then buy the system, the biggest hurdle for the Sega Saturn is finding the games. Like, you don't want to just buy that system and then buy $50 sports titles for it. And at the current year and time that we're in, even the sports games that on like the PS1 are like free, they're like out on the sidewalk for free or like 30 cents. You can't even find those on the Sega Saturn for that price. Like, even the $1 NFL 96 games on the Sega Saturn, those still fetch a price. So that's the biggest barrier there, and I just kind of missed out. And unfortunately, I don't think I'll ever get to play one. I hope someday somebody I know either has one, or I can borrow one, or be lucky enough to stumble across one, because that would be the ultimate. Nintendo 64, I'm going to give that a B. This, of course, here is the Pikachu edition. I remember the first Christmas right after that came out, which wasn't too far after that, and basically my brother and I, but since he's the older brother, ended up being kind of his Nintendo 64. We were like the Nintendo kids, just screaming like, oh my, and I remember seeing Mario 64 for the first time on that thing, and it's just like all the stories you've ever heard about anybody who was there at that time, how great Mario 64 was. And all I'm going to say is that, yeah, I was there at that time, and it really was that great. And then, you know, one of my neighbors, he had two brothers and a couple other people down the street. A bunch of different people had a 64. And so at those times, of course, we all played GoldenEye and Pokemon Snap, and then we started seeing like Pokemon Stadium and WrestleMania 2000 and games like Turok and the original Super Smash Brothers when that came out, and Mario Party and Zelda Ocarina of Time. Like, all those games encompass what the 64 are. And so I would give it an A. I still have a 64 with a kind of limited library, but those memories are A class, maybe even S class. Like, it definitely has a severe lack of games, in there being only like 270 something US released games, I believe it is. But just those games that I just listed off a minute ago, the amount of memories and time that were sunk into those, like, those are enough to just define a childhood. So I'm gonna go with that. I'll give the Atari a D. I remember playing that thing when I was maybe 5, and one of my dad's friends, who I was friends with his son, there was this one day where our parents were both just kind of talking, and we were kind of like in and out of the house, and I started seeing that his dad had this giant collection and all these old school looking tubs of, you know, they seemed like cassette tapes, which my dad had at the time, you know, like the old school, like under the TV, like the VCR plastic trays with all the VHS tapes stuffed in them. It was kind of the same thing, except they were full of these video games for this Atari 2600, and I think he also had the 7600 or 7200, yeah. And there was just stacks and stacks and stacks of games, just this massive library. We were just going through them and playing them, and that's almost a memory that doesn't seem like it really happened, but it was just so long ago that I remember like this 1 or 2 days in a row where that was just all we played. A lot of time has passed since then, and I even had at one point an Atari 2600 like plug and play console, and those games are just a little bit beyond my time, so I have no real attachment to them. So that's why I'm gonna go ahead and give that system a D. We're at the Super Famicom, which I've never seen one or played one, but okay, so, alright, never mind. Okay, so this is the NES. I'm gonna give NES an S tier, just because of how many memories it actually really truly brought to me. So, as well, we have the Super Nintendo. That was a system I didn't grow up with. My cousins had one, and I remember the first time seeing like F-Zero and Super Mario World and Star Fox. And that was this one Christmas. It must have been 94, maybe the Christmas of 94 or 95. I'm not even sure at that point, but I was only 7, 6.5, 7.5. And if it was the following year, then I would have been 8. And that was a system, like I said, you know, I saw at my cousin's house, and we only ever went over there for Christmas just that one time during the year. And then after leaving there, it was like no one had a Super Nintendo. None of my friends, nobody I went to school with. The Super Nintendo was almost like the Sega Mega Drive. Like, I don't know anybody from that time who had a Mega Drive. And of course, I'm here in the United States on the East Coast, and from all the gaming channels and stuff like that, it seems like there was plenty of us that were like East Coast or West Coast, wherever, scattered across America, that lived and bought and had the Mega Drive, which to this day I've never seen one in person or played one in person. The Super Nintendo was kind of the same thing until years and years later, where eventually I played all the good stuff. And of course, one of my best friends after like high school, like growing up, he had a Super Nintendo, so that's where I really played the bulk of the games. But that was just one system that, man, I really wish that I had as a kid. But of course, with things like the Super Nintendo Classic, and I was lucky enough to purchase one for, it was, I think, $60 along with like 10 games, which basically it came with all the good ones like Donkey Kong and Mario and Star Fox, so that was pretty good. I think I'd give the Xbox at A tier, so same for like the NES. I didn't really say much about it, but that was like the first system, that and the Game Boy. I mean, I was 2 years old at the time. My parents originally bought a Nintendo for themselves and for their friends to basically come over and be whatever, like this new interactive experience that was sort of heightening, that these new people were kind of getting their hands on. Such people like my parents, they'd drink a few beers, play some Tetris or some Mario 1, and jump right into the pit, and they would laugh and have a blast. So my mom went to like a JCPenney, and the thing rang up as like a stereo, and instead of it being $189 or $179 or however much it was priced at that time, I mean, we're talking like, this would have been like 1987, like the year that I was born. The thing rang up as a radio for like $39 or $49, and my mom was able to walk out of like a Sears with a Nintendo for a third of the price of what it actually was. So then naturally my brother, who would have been 3 or 4 at the time, he basically took over the Nintendo, and you know, that was all we played for years and years. Except my mom, she had friends who had Nintendo and their kids had Nintendo, and occasionally she would just come home with this, sometimes a giant stack, sometimes like a smaller box, sometimes just 1 cartridge, 2 cartridge. She would go to like Goodwill stores, and we eventually just amassed this giant box with probably like a good 150 games. So the NES was my childhood, and some of those games I haven't played in so long, but I definitely respect the NES, you know. Hats off to Nintendo, the innovators. They truly innovated on that one. So same for the Xbox 360. That thing came out in 2005. The thing was way too much when it came out. I believe it was $400 or $500. And I suppose at that time I had a job. I could have bought one, but it just seemed like way too much. And going online and stuff, and you start hearing about the Red Ring of Death. And my friend, he bought a launch one, and maybe after 6 months or so, his died. And he was very upset, which I would have been. That's exactly why I didn't buy one. But my friend, he waited probably several months after it came out, and then he bought one, and that thing lasted for a good 2 or 3 years before his died. And then I finally bought one in like 2006 or 7, I believe it was. And that was after the Red Ring had kind of like died down a bit, and they extended their warranty by 3 years. You know, it cost Microsoft like over $1 billion to take care of that oopsie doopsie, and that was one of the biggest oopsie doopsies in all of gaming. And even my Xbox 360, it's a replacement unit, because the one that I did buy initially, oh hey Max, I initially bought mine, and I only had the thing for like 7 months, and I remember I was playing the Bourne Ultimatum game, or the Bourne something, the Bourne Legacy, I believe it was. The game froze, the Xbox froze, sitting there hitting the buttons on the controller. Okay, I shut it off. I came back like an hour later to turn it on, the Red Ring went on, and of course I sent it out. They sent back a replacement unit, which I thought would be even more faulty, and I was kind of mad that I didn't get mine back. I got this replacement one that was clearly used. It wasn't shiny, it wasn't completely brand new. They tried to make it look brand new. It wasn't even brand new plastics on the thing. Like, I think the most that they did was put the brand new chrome plate on the disc tray. So the Xbox 360, you know, after I got my replacement model, that thing has lasted since, I think that was 2008. So now I've had my Xbox 360 for 11 years, and it's just one of the best of all time. So yeah, I think I'll give that an S tier as far as from personal enjoyment and experience. PlayStation 4, PlayStation 3. I love PlayStation 1 to death. Here's PlayStation 1, going right up there with the S tier. And probably PlayStation 2 will get a B. So I'm sure as some of you have seen, I have a couple like PlayStation videos on the channel. I have one that's going through my whole PlayStation 1 collection. So if you're new to the channel, go ahead and check that video out. I'll try to remember to put a card up above or put it down in the description. And it's just my whole PS1 collection. It's my favorite. As you can see here, I'm putting it on the S tier because that was the first system that wasn't mine and my brother's. It was the first that was for me. It was mine, and the games that I bought for it. I had a job at like 11 years old. I was bussing tables. It's kind of a little bit probably out of child labor laws, and I was supposed to have a work permit, but I was like 11 turning 12 all the way up to 13, and I was bussing tables, and I was always coming home with like a good 60, 70 bucks. So at that time I was actually buying my own games, and I had quite a bit of money for being 11 and 12. PlayStation 1 was my top tier experience. PlayStation 2 thing was great. There was plenty of games on it, plenty of games that I owned, plenty of games my friends had. We traded, we played a just massive amount of games. So many great series have actually gotten their start on the PS2 and or the PS1 as well. So those are both top tier experiences. And by the time the Xbox 360 came out, that's pretty much all I was playing. One of my friends, he spent like 600 bucks on the PS3. After a year or two, his died. He went out and bought another one, and he just completely loved the thing. You know, he had it hooked up online. He had like Netflix for it, and you could browse the web and stuff. And aside from that, I think I held a controller for one for maybe like 10 minutes. I think at one point, me and him both played a game at one point, but other than that, I don't own a PS3 or a PS4, and I literally haven't played any single game on either of those. I think I'll have a regret on that at some point, because it's kind of the same with Nintendo, where I paid attention to the Nintendo, then didn't really know much about the Super Nintendo until way later. And then of course, I'm gonna get to it in a minute, I had a GameCube, and then I didn't pay attention to the Wii or the Wii U, and now I have a Nintendo Switch. So during those times, even though I actually own a lot of systems from just in general over the years, and pretty much most of the great systems I do own, there was, I guess at least for the past 12 years, I've had like this flip-flop thing, or maybe like 15 years, where it's like I had the PS1 and the PS2 and the N64, and then I got a DS, but I didn't have a Game Boy Advance. But I did have a Dreamcast when that came out. But I loved PlayStation, PS1, PS2, didn't get the PSP or the PS Vita, but I had an Xbox 360 and then didn't pay attention to the PS3 or PS4 at all. Me, I'm a Switch owner and player pretty much for the past 3 years going on, and most of the great games that are worth playing anyway, they do come to the Switch. They come at a price, you know, graphical fidelity, frame rate, and stuff like that. But for the most part, the best of the best games that have come out, I've been able to experience in one form or another. There's a couple that I haven't been able to, and so for something like the PS4, probably by the end of this year, Black Friday or something, when Final Fantasy VII Remake comes out, that's going to be a game that I'm getting. And then from there, I'll most likely work my way back in time. I'll play something like Death Stranding. Also forward to Ghost of Tsushima. Ghost of Tsushima. But that might be a next-gen game, so I don't really know. And then from, like I'm saying, from that end of the spectrum, I'll work my way back and hit up Resident Evil 2 Remake, and then play God of War, and then play Spider-Man, and then play The Last of Us. And also there's the story of, well, it's not really a story, but it's a key point that after the Xbox 360 came out, and going into 2012, 2013, 14, that's when I kind of just stopped paying attention to gaming. And anyways, enough blabbering, I'm gonna get on to the next system here. The Genesis. I'll put that at a B tier. I do love the Genesis. I do think, for me personally, there was a lack of really, really great games that I love. Of course, you have the general fare of games, Golden Axe and Sonic and all those types of games, the ones that are on like the Genesis Mini now, and as well as the Sega Genesis Ages collection that are on, you know, Xbox One and Nintendo Switch. I do have that collection, and of course I love games like Sonic 1, 2, and 3. And of course I love Golden Axe and Altered Beast. There just seems to be a lack of more games that interest me, and I know that there's still quite a big library. It just seems like one of those systems that it keeps getting the same spotlight kind of shined on it. There's not a lot of games that I've seen out of all these collectors and video makers on YouTube and retro channels and stuff like that. It seems to be most of the games that are brought up are ones that I know about, and have played, or my friends have played, or have come out on these clone consoles like the AT games, Sega Genesis Mini. It seems like a lot of those games, they're kind of just the same ones. There haven't really been throughout the years like at least a good dozen or so that weren't talked about and then got unearthed. Like most of the ones that are popular and are regarded are the ones that I already know about. So it seemed to just come down to this. I've had my time with it, and I guess it just doesn't interest me as much, although I love it and I had fun with it during its heyday. My brother, we had a Genesis like kind of after it came out. This was probably in like 91 or 92 at that point. Might have even been like 93, I'm not really sure, but at least two other households in the neighborhood, and we grew up in kind of like a project style of area, and I couldn't have been more grateful at the time to have grown up like that, where right down a couple doors down that had like a Sega Genesis, or I think at one point there was a kid that had like a 3DO, and it was this disc-based thing. Like I'm not even sure if it was that. That's kind of throughout the years what I've puzzled together and what I think it was, but I'm not even sure. My brain was still mushy at that point. I was maybe 5.5. So those were some of my first gaming experiences that weren't in my own household. So anyways, again, Sega Genesis, I love it, but I think that there was just a little bit missing there, and there's a little bit where I don't really care, I guess, as much to go back to. And I'm just gonna go ahead and put Xbox One at a C. The thing came out, I saw a friend that had it. I didn't really care too much about it, and I have one in my own home, and really the only game that I bought on it was Red Dead Redemption 2. It's a good system, it's a good entertainment box. Just seems like it needs a little bit more on the thing. It's a PC. Okay, so that's a PC. I'm not a PC gamer. I'll just put the PC at S tier. Not much of a PC gamer, but the general consensus is every game can look as great as the system that you own, so that means that every experience that has ever been on PC, or in some cases there's games that haven't been on console that have been on PC, and even vice versa, still the PC remains to be the premier way as long as you have the money and the hardware. The Xbox at a B tier? Now, I wish I still had an original Xbox. I believe I bought one, I think it was after my brother bought one. I had one for several years, probably from like freshman year of high school, and that would have been, man, maybe I didn't have it really that long. Okay, so maybe I had an Xbox for about 2 years. Bought the thing brand new, like I bought Halo with it, Amped Snowboarding, Project Gotham Racing, and Unreal Championship, and like Quake 3. Anyways, regardless, getting back to the system, that thing was great, and then I just sort of ended up selling it, and I wanted to get a GameCube. So we're just gonna go ahead and jump back down to the GameCube here. That was at the point where I bought a GameCube, and the kid that gave it to me, I don't think I paid that much for. I wish I could go back. I wish we all could go back, boost the sales of all these systems, because the GameCube was $99. Like, I don't even remember that. I wish I had like bought a brand new one and just left it sealed until now. Like, bought the GameCube and it came with Wind Waker, which I still have. At some point I bought Mario Kart Double Dasher, the Ocarina of Time with the Master Quest. I had that. And actually just a week ago I was able to buy a bunch of GameCube games. But anyways, the GameCube was another one that I bought, and I had Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles on it. But the notable games that I remember playing on it were like Gauntlet Legends, along with, of course, the Wind Waker, Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes. I also have a Mortal Kombat, what is it, Alliance or Allegiance? Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, stuff like Soul Calibur, and some of those games I got rid of, and it's kind of a shame, but man, damn. So anyways, that's kind of my gaming history here. And then that leads us to the Switch, which again, I'll give an S tier. I mean, after it's all said and done, just the amount of games that are on it. One of my favorite consoles of all time. It's really hard to say that it's better than any others, because it's easier to look at a finished library in hindsight 2020 and then say, no, it's not better, or it is better. It's still ongoing. I think with my age and stuff like that, maybe when I'm like 50, I'll be like, oh God, the golden years of the Nintendo Switch, and I'll think about Etika, and I'll think about just the launch of it and the look and all the things that you think about, all the different gaming experiences and all that. But I'm not a teenager anymore, so a lot of these other games, a lot of these other systems have to do with my childhood and my teenage years, just being free of responsibility and completely careless and just being fully taken care of, and you could just sit and do nothing because you're a kid and just enjoy your whole day, enjoy everything. And looking back on it, man, those were great times. So anyways, that's the list here. There's one more that I just realized that wasn't on here, and it's the Sega Dreamcast. And since it starts with an S, it's gonna go up here in the S category. So apologies that that's not on here. I'm just gonna kind of end the video here. I love the Sega Dreamcast. One of the best systems ever. Games are still being made for it. Games are still coming out for Commodore 64 and Atari 2600. So there's still such a huge market for all this stuff. And in one form or another, I've experienced most of it, seen it unfold, lived through it, played most of the games, most of the top tier titles. And so for that, you know, I'm pretty fortunate to have actually lived through all that and done it. And these systems are just one more part of me and who I am, and part of my experiences, and a lot of my time and money and brain power has gone into gaming, and it's just been a real joy. So anyways, guys, that's my tier list for most of these systems that have come out, from the NES all the way up to the Nintendo Switch. What is your list? Let me know in the comments down below. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit the like button. Click the bell if you want to be notified when more videos like this come out. I'm DDub. Don't forget to subscribe too. Always got to subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video or learned something about me, or maybe yourself. Let me know in the comments below once again. I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a good day. Thanks. Thank you.